Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 77 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're glad to have you back again with us this week. My name's AJ as usual, and there's Scott where he always is. And we're excited to have a guest with us today. This is Mike Hasty. He's the co-founder of GrowingHealthierChurches.com and assistant minister of the Newtown Erskineville Anglican Church way down in Sydney, Australia. Our first Australian guest. I will spare everybody a cringe-worthy Australian accent and just say welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Should I say thanks, y'all?
There you go. All right.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I was waiting for AJ to say something like "put some shrimp on the barbie" or something.
No, we don't do that.
Oh, give me more credit.
Well, some of us do, but
please give me more credit. All right. Well, this is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to be talking today more specifically about the power and the pitfalls of metrics. So really our topic is about metrics, and Mike's tool is about helping your church have better dashboard metrics about what's going on. So that kind of frames what our conversation is about today.
You know, we're always on the hunt for people who share the passion that we do for church health. And Mike actually reached out to me and just said, "Hey, I love, how you all are framing the conversation about church health." And then I saw what he was doing and I said, "We got to get you on the podcast." Because I love that you're thinking in critical ways, Mike, about metrics, but within the framework of church health. And something that you said off air, and we'll talk more about this as we go further along, but something you said off air is so good that I think that the church growth movement, which started in the 1990s or so, 80s, made the idea of church metrics go sideways in some bad ways, I think. And it's put a bad taste in people's mouth. And so maybe just before we dive into the meat of this episode, Mike, maybe give us a little bit of background on your heart for wanting to create a tool like Growing Healthier Churches and really trying to take on the task of framing metrics as something that's healthy. Mm-hmm. So what was your journey? Because you're a pastor as well. So what was your journey to wanting to develop this tool?
Sure. I'm sold out to see God's church grow. Like it's as simple as that. I mean, why wouldn't we want to see more people come to know Jesus? Every pastor wants that. I think what I've noticed in contemporary modern church is just the complexity of it. Everyone's got either leadership pipelines or integration pathways, and there's so much going on that sometimes we're either buried in data or we don't have what's important in front of us, or different people around the table have different ideas on what growth looks like. And so I'm just keen to see teams function at a higher level, in greater unison, sold out for growth. It's as simple as that.
Oh, that's really good. So tell me a little bit about just the sort of the practical journey. Like, when did you decide to start making this tool? And I know you're the co-founder, you've got a guy on the software side of things that's really helped you. So how did that come together?
Yeah, so I mean, I was an engineer before being a pastor, I'm still recovering from that, but I guess that brought an analytics and sort of a data mind to my love for people. And so very early on as a youth and young adults pastor, I was already developing sort of some basic dashboard tools to just keep in front of my leadership team what was important. And, to a place for prayer and kind of, coming together and discussion. That was pretty primitive as I look back on it now. What we've developed over this last year was simple. I mean, I've not met my co-founder Bruce in person, to be honest. It's been, we met on it sounds like a dating site, but we met on sort of a Facebook forum, and he had incredible skills, and I had this kind of, I'd been working on this stuff, and we just started chatting, and it really just evolved. We had no plan to sort of launch a piece of software. We simply had kind of like, hey, there's something we could do, and it might be able to help churches. and now it's evolved into something where I'm, chatting to people outside the world about it. So, yeah, I guess from little things, big things grow.
Oh, that's awesome. So let me give I want to focus on this topic that we've put out there, the power and pitfall of metrics, but just so that people have a good context understanding of what growing healthier churches is. It is right now a free tool that for churches that use the Tithely database. And I understand there's a hope to be able to expand to other databases moving forward. So maybe by the time this is released, there might be a waiting list for some other databases, church management softwares. But for right now, if you've got Tithely, you could access this right now, and it's leverages the Google Data Studio to create a custom dashboard so that you can easily see reporting type elements from Tithely without having to go in and manually create these specific types of custom reports, so that you can see how you're doing in terms of retention with guests, connection with volunteers, and engagement in groups and these kinds of things, so that you can see people moving through your discipleship pathway and really growing not only the size of your church, but the depth of maturity in the church. Did I do an okay job explaining?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, so larger churches are probably already doing this kind of stuff, but I still think that the way we've designed what we've designed will bring a clarity and kind of a sort of, maybe sharpen what they're doing. But smaller churches who just don't have the horsepower or kind of maybe the expertise, this could be a huge asset. So.
Yeah, and so the way that it works, again, as a layman understands it, they folks that have the Tithely software can work with you all. You all walk them through how to set this up, but it's essentially an API key that connects with your database, and then it's going to start. You're going to have a URL set up for your church, and you'll be able to pull up that link and get a real-time.
That's it.
Reporting from
every time you open this tool, it shows you what's happening in real time and what has happened. It's really as simple as that. I mean, there's so much data sort of sitting in church databases. We've sort of just synthesized that.
Oh man, I love that so much. And right now it's free. So if you're listening to this, at some point this may not be a free tool. Right now it's a free tool. So if you have Tithely, I would just recommend going to growinghealthierchurches.com and taking advantage of it while you can. So let's get into this topic of the power and pitfalls of metrics. Let's start with this idea of how metrics can be powerful. Metrics can give focus and bring some clarity maybe out of a whole bunch of just random numbers. So talk to me a little bit about how metrics can focus a team, a leadership team, whether that be elders or deacons or a staff team.
Yeah. I mean, I love the question, what does good look like? And as soon as you kind of ask that question in a team, you might get a whole bunch of different answers. But what I've noticed in ministry teams as well is that particularly leaders, but everyone around that leadership table will bring an anecdote to support their version of good. And they're great stories. I love stories. In fact, I never want to lose stories. I don't want data to overcome that, because that represents stories. But the problem with sharing anecdotes to support your version of good is you don't know how representative that is. It's hard to know if that's part of a trajectory of good, of growth. And so what we want to do is join stories and data so that a team can come together and say, actually, this is the good that we're pursuing under God. This is what growth would look like. But there's all kinds of different versions of growth. Like there's so many aspects to church health and life. So how do you choose to kind of work out what is it that you want to focus on in any particular year? I mean, I love the 4 disciplines of execution and that idea that in the whirlwind of kind of, complex modern life, what might you choose to set as a goal so that your team can rally around that and kind of come in unity and clarity around that and say, actually, we're going to pull together and seek growth in this space. So I'm hoping that this tool might allow that.
You make such a good point about the power of anecdotes in sort of a good way and a bad way. I think about the year that we just experienced in 2020, and it was really easy to go, wow, this was such a bad year. And when we go, well, why was it bad? Certainly there are some hard number data. I mean, just far too many people died from a terrible disease. That is true. But it's punctuated by stories, things that we read. And sometimes those stories misrepresent maybe the reality to some extent. So I think it's such a wise point to say, let's be sure that we've got a clear view of what's really going on. Yes, our anecdotal experiences are true and real, but let's marry that with some raw numbers so that we don't make something too big or too small, and know what's really going on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. Perception is reality for the person perceiving it. And so sometimes it takes some objectivity to bring that clarity and be able to make good decisions based on, real information.
When we don't have good information, people just they only act out of their own truth, so to speak, their own anecdotal reality. Can you tell me about maybe a specific instance you might be able to think of where using this data was able to create some unity around for your team in a moment to catalyze some action?
Yeah, I could think of a couple of things. One is that when we first spooled these health gauges up in front of our sort of ministry team, there was this kind of, everyone just sort of went about exploring the kind of different aspects that were important to them and just started going, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And so it naturally generated conversation. It sort of provoked curiosity. So I love that it just brought a whole bunch of stuff to the surface. But I can think of one particular example where I was chatting to our small group leadership team at a particular congregation. And, I had concerns about some of the health aspects to that. And one of the small group leaders thought, that things were going fine. And so, what happened then is I was able to bring up some of these metrics and just say, look, tell me what you see. And there was just this kind of like, oh, wow. And so that was just a really kind of interesting moment to just not really force kind of what I was seeing upon that person, but just to say, actually, let's just make sure we're seeing the same thing together. Mm-hmm. And out of that came a really fruitful conversation.
I had an instance when I was working with a church. I was presenting a report, and I threw up a graph in front of, it was not the entire congregation, but a large chunk of a particular congregation. And I put a graph up on a screen of just attendance numbers, which is something you'd think that they would know, just from their own experience over the last 5 years. And when they saw the decline in one of their particular services, it declined by something like 40% over the last 5 years, there was an audible gasp in the room. They were like, the room collectively was shocked. Yeah. And that was so surprising to me, because I would have thought, surely they know. Surely they look around on a Sunday and go, wow, it seems like there's fewer people here than 5 years ago. But they didn't know. They were not aware. And so,
yeah. And so I love how a simple graph can create a sense of urgency. We should never lose that sense of urgency. Sometimes we get comfortable with our status quo. But to have that sort of that urgency that's collectively felt, and kind of, yeah, that's a really good thing.
There is something psychological, but we need the red ink. Like, we need those visual reminders of this isn't right. We need to fix this. And when we don't have those, we don't act with any urgency. Mike, there's a couple challenges, I think, around metrics as well. So moving into pitfalls, we know that it can give us focus and create unity as a team. But I know that some of the pastors who are listening to this are already struggling with some of these challenges. One is, how do you respond to the criticism that you can't distill the health of a church to, a handful of gauges on a report? What's your response to that when people feel that way?
I'd say right on. I'd be right on board with them, actually. And I think in some ways I've created a dangerous tool if people want to abuse it. That is, if people wanted to distill health and just chase down, a graph, then that's a dead end. That's not what we're on about. This is a catalyst for leadership conversation amongst leadership teams. And so let this kind of be a tool to kind of provoke that conversation and to show you some aspects that might challenge your anecdotes. But if it's going to make a horrible and ungodly master.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate about your tool, Mike, is there's some buttons, and in fact, if you're listening to this on the audio version, you may want to later on hop onto the video version, because I think what I'm going to do, Mike, if you're open to it, is maybe at the end of this episode, we'll just keep recording, and you can kind of show us what's going on. We'll cut the audio version off because it won't mean anything to the folks just listening, but the folks who are watching will kind of give you a bonus ending to the video version so people can actually see what's up. But one of the things that I appreciate, just to give a teaser for that, is that you have a couple of toggle buttons under each gauge, and one of them is pastoral, because I understand that one of the drivers for you all is not just here's a gauge and here's the number that you're at right now, but to point that back to individual people and be able to follow up with them and connect with them and figure out where they are at in their spiritual journey, and not just looking at them as a number, but them as a person.
Absolutely.
So tell me about how that part of developing the tool, like how did you make sure that the people part didn't get lost in the numbers?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's always in danger of being lost because we're presenting the data, through graphs and whatnot. With the pastoral dashboards, we really wanted to sort of separate that out from the strategic dashboards because we wanted to make sure that people and sort of having a weekly rhythm of being with people and following up people was in focus. And so, you can see very clearly sort of engagement patterns of individuals. And, I'm not a fan of sort of red flagging people that have sort of failed a criteria. I'm more about making sure we're aware of kind of how engaged our people are. And if there are concerns, follow that up. There could be legitimate reasons for that. There could be that could provoke a really timely conversation at the same time. And so we're always on about people. We're on about sort of a healthy church being, the church is the people, right? So without people and their heart and stories, I'm not sure what we're doing.
I often like to point people to when we have this discussion about systems and methods for tracking people and things like that. It just makes church people uncomfortable on some level, because it feels like that's something that Google's doing, is tracking you, right? At the same time, I always like to point them to the parable of the lost sheep. And in the beginning, the way that parable starts is he says, "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one, does not go chase him down," basically. And so we often frame that parable like, wow, what amazing love that the shepherd would leave the 99 to go and chase the one. But that's not the premise of the parable. The parable is, what man wouldn't do that? What shepherd wouldn't leave the 99 to go and chase the one? And the problem for so many of our churches, Mike, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, is that pastors don't know who the one is.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a heart to go and chase down the one that's left the fold, but they don't know who that is. And so people are slipping out that back door, and they don't have a method for finding it. And there isn't a way other than tracking through data.
Yeah.
And I don't see this as a bad thing or an unspiritual thing.
Yeah, that's right. One of the passages that stood out to me in thinking about the negatives of metric, or the pitfalls of metrics, is Revelation 2. It's sort of always been a really cutting passage for me, where Jesus is speaking to that church and says, I've seen your good deeds, and so all the health gauges would be like, woo, full tilt, great job, but then Jesus cuts them down and says, you've lost your first love. And so I'm always concerned that we would have all these kind of like pretty gauges and sort of graphs, but if we've lost our first love, that is Christ, then that is the failure of the church growth movement, right? When it became that those kind of management metrics became the idol, and it was all about that, and they lost their first love. So I want to have both, right? And we're called to have both. We're called to have good deeds and to act in out of faith. And so how do we allow metrics to actually make sure that we keep faith in Christ, love for him and for the world in focus? That's the leadership conversation that I want to have.
It's a good transition to this question. Sometimes, Mike, especially in a year like 2020 we had last year, the numbers just aren't good. And through, to some degree, no fault of your own, right? I mean, no one church is responsible. No church is responsible for the pandemic, and that made everybody's graphs go south. And so, how do we not tie our worth as pastors, as leaders, and as churches to downward trending graphs? And how can we still be faithful even when the gauges look really poor?
That's great. I mean, maybe there's a few things to say there. One is big fan of Jim Collins, Face the Brutal Facts. So like, just be aware that like some of the stuff that you see might be confronting. And, sometimes as a pastor, you kind of, your last sermon might not have been great and you feel horrible. That's when you know that you're kind of starting to idolize, how you want to be perceived. And I think the same goes for metrics here. If something shows you something you don't like, and that really sort of brings you down, then maybe that's a prompt to say, actually, of course we want growth, but maybe I've attached my worth to that. And as we look back through the passages of scripture, not every character was a Paul, right? And so you look at some of the prophets of the Old Testament, and it looked like their ministry was completely fruitless. And yet they were faithful and called by God. And so, the whole kind of faithful fruitfulness distinction, yes, we're absolutely called to be faithful. We want fruitfulness, but it's God that gives the growth. And so I want to encourage pastors that if metrics shows you things that are hard to see, let that kind of bring you in prayer before God, not crush you because you're not as good as you think you are, or whatever the case may be. It's always a case to kind of come back before God, because it's Him that gives the growth anyway.
We have to think about fruitfulness beyond our own timeline and not just in the day-to-day that we're experiencing as we're experiencing it.
I think 2020 has showed maybe a few of us that. So in our context, so the numbers don't look great. So it was really hard to measure service attendance when we were online entirely, and service attendance is still kind of, challenging, not where I'd like it to be. And yet there's all these kind of new ministries and new stories that are appearing because we've been forced to pivot and kind of explore different things, and God's showing us different things. And so the numbers aren't everything. I really want to see them as a catalyst more than a controller.
One last question I want to ask you is about how do we avoid the pitfall of bad data? Like, how do we make sure that the data that we're looking at is good? And how would we know the difference between good data and bad data?
Yeah, so garbage in, garbage out. Like if it just looks prettier on the other side. So what the way we design the tool is, it does provoke curiosity. And so as you go to explore stuff that's either interesting because it's great or interesting because it's poor, it will show you as you dig down that maybe there's some stuff that's a bit off. And so I'm hoping that there's a full circle here where using this tool actually drives you deeper into better practice and cleaning out some of your data. And often as you clean, sometimes the metrics drop a bit, but you got to know what you got to know. It's the best way to start making decisions. And so, I think we need to be careful that we are kind of building metrics off fallible kind of, measurements. So you just got to be careful. But at the same time, hopefully it does promote better practice.
As we begin to sort of wrap up and kind of pivot towards wrapping up, I want to just ask, even since the audio folks are still with us, can you kind of give us a brief overview of the kinds of data that we are tracking? I know I kind of touched on that at the beginning, but what are the specific gauges that people can expect to see when they're using the Growing Healthier Churches tool?
Yeah, great. I mean, that they are kind of what some people would call input results. So you can't measure in real time where people are at in their heart. So that's obvious. But that's where we want to head. That's kind of what we want to keep in focus: people's stories, people's hearts, their faith, their love. What we can measure in real time are things like the basics of service attendance, of when your new people are arriving, how much they stick around. Do they become part of your church. So thinking about integration pipelines. How many of your church are in small groups? Are they attending? How many are volunteering? Like they're really base level kind of measurements. But I guess, we're hoping that the genius of it is that it's real time and that it promotes these curious leadership conversations.
Well, I am anxious for our video viewers to get a look at it here in a minute. But yeah, as we were kind of here in the last few minutes, one, kind of a visual thing that's come to mind for me in the relationship between church health and good data. And I'm really kind of seeing this now as more of like a sandwich that on one end, maybe one slice of bread on one end is pursuing church health, biblical church health, knowing what a healthy church will look like, what your church will look like when it's healthy. And then really the meat in the middle is the data. That's the metrics that, we know what health is going to look like. How are we going to measure it? And then the other side of our sandwich, our next piece of bread, is what do we do with the information once we get it? Because we can't miss that point that if we're measuring the right things, getting good information, there has to be a reaction then to it. Either to keep doing what you're doing if it's working well, or to make the necessary changes so that you can adjust. And so, I think these kind of three layers of church health and metrics have got to be considered from start to finish, or we're not going to really get the results, or we're not going to just see change at all. Because, measuring something and, just like letting that dashboard cross your desk and never doing anything with it still doesn't do anything for you. So, and I think that's probably where a lot of burnout might come in for church leaders, is like, oh yes, more information, great. But if you don't really take to heart what the information's telling you, then, you're back in that, the old thing about insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If tools like what Mike has can give you good information and you choose not to act on it, then that's on you. And that's got to be something that we as church leaders continue to think about, is how are we going to improve what we're doing based on good information? Mike, thanks for putting this tool together, and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, well, thanks for your great work, and thanks for the encouragement.
For those who are listening on the audio, this is going to be the end for you. You can check out the show notes today at malfirsgroup.com/77. There's an article there by Mike about the power and pitfalls of metrics. So we want you to check that out. But for those of you who are watching online, you get an extra special treat, and you're going to get a little peek inside the tool. And so if you're listening to the audio, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching the video, keep on watching. All right, Mike. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen with us and just give us a little peek at how the tool works and what folks can look forward to getting if they're able to tune in.
Yeah, sure. That's coming through right now.
Yeah, looks great.
Yeah, so that's what you see straight up when you kind of connect your database with Growing Healthier Churches. And we wanted this homepage to just be something really simple, something you could keep in front of you at your monthly, parish council or board meetings, or even kind of weekly in your ministry leadership meetings, and just go, okay, how are we tracking? And just, these simple aspects of church health, whether it be, how many visitors you're seeing, a visitor ratio based on how big your church is, how many of those are staying, what the regularity of your church members are, how many of those are in groups, and how many are volunteering, and straight away, every time I've brought this up for churches, I'm saying stuff and they're not listening. They're just like, oh, that's interesting. They've got all this stuff going on in their head as they connect what they felt with now what they're seeing. And so we really want to, as I keep saying, we want to provoke curiosity. We want people to explore the health of their church, and we want it to be interactive in that sense. And so we've buried complexity, so that we keep simplicity up front. And so, for instance, this example church, they got 275 church members. 42% of that 275 have come through the front doors of that church as visitors. So that's 116 people. That's not bad. Those blue kind of, indicators are just, we just put there to kind of, again, provoke a conversation. You have to work out as a church leadership team, is that good? have a conversation around that. But what my eyes instantly drawn to in this gauge set is the stay ratio.
Yeah.
I'm less than happy, to be honest, that 10% of those visitors have stayed. And so why is that? And so if we, as you asked,
hey, one thing on that, Mike, but that you and I had talked about this before, because I had a chance to see this once. Just for those who are watching, the user can define what qualifies, what transitions someone from visitor to stay. So that doesn't necessarily have to be the same. You actually have to decide, like the church has to decide when do we officially say someone has stayed, but that can be customized. Am I getting that right?
That's right. So Tightly and Elvento, the church management system with those guys, it operates on sort of people categories. And so if someone's new, they're simply new because they've been added to the system. But if they become a people category that you've defined as sort of considered as church membership, and there might be a couple of categories in that. For us, it's crowd and core. If they enter those church categories, then they're categorized as part of your church family or church membership. And so there's a distinction then between those who have recently entered and those who have become church members. And we want to notice that distinction. Yeah. It provokes different questions. And so for us, I want to start asking questions around why it's 10%. And I want to ask that why question with my leadership team. So you can use this tool individually, but you can also use it really powerfully with others. And so I simply click on the strategic dashboard below that particular gauge. And, it starts giving you real-time information straight away. So right now it's hitting the API for that database. And while the real time's good, the downside is that you've got to wait for it to kind of do that crunching. And it's going to start giving you information about, okay, where did those new people come? When did they come through the year? Who's still stuck in that pipeline? And it'll start showing you some sparkline attendance patterns of those who are in that pipeline. So you can start kind of like comparing, how does this year fare with last year? Who are the particular people we have in question here? So we start grounding our exploration in individual stories. And that whole process is where the power is. It's not just in simply being presented with the answer through a graph. It's actually in that conversation. So for here, see, we've got a whole bunch of people in our night church here, in this particular example church, and only a few of those have transitioned across. Now I can see straight away that there are a few people here who have been attending 7, 9, 13 times. Maybe that's poor data, coming back to sort of your comment at the end there, Scott. Go and explore that, go find that and say, those people are not newcomers, they're totally core or crowd. Let's move them across. And so this process starts, improving. Why did 9 a.m. congregate see so few people, and why there are so many? I don't know the answer to that. You've got to discuss that in your leadership team. And of course, 2020,
well, and
as we look
also,
down here,
it seems interesting. Those night church folks, maybe all they're ever doing is just showing up to church. Like they're never taking any other action. Is that why they wouldn't necessarily have moved over? Like they only ever just showed up? They didn't
yeah. So you can totally go and explore that. And so actually, as we look down into sort of individual people, you can click on, I've anonymized the names for this presentation, but you can click on that person and it will open up that profile for that person in your dashboard, in your database. And you can actually look at what's happening with that particular person. You could also trace that person through the other aspects of this dashboard suite as well. So just to kind of show you a couple other things, you could look at your attendance patterns of your whole church. And you can see here, Christmas services weren't measured very well for this particular church. You can see here, there's a bunch of people in the 0% category who haven't been attending. And so you want to go click on that and actually start exploring who's in that list. Or, you want to kind of be focusing on how, there's 50% plus kind of categories. Who are they, and how can you kind of encourage them to be advocates for, bringing the 25 and the 0%ers up? And then you can also look at small group analysis to look at, how many people in your church are attending small groups, and even drill down even further to look at, attendance patterns of groups. Now this has been reset for the year, so we don't have group patterns just yet, but you can see in the past year, you can have a look at individual groups and how they're attending. I remember actually, in the example I shared, I brought up the particular analysis of congregations groups, and once I brought up, that's where the conversation was. So you can see that you can, there's a lot of information here. We've tried to keep that, hold that back until you want to see it, kind of thing, so that you don't get buried by information. Yeah.
Well, and I love, we talked about this earlier in the episode, but I love how on that pastoral side, it focuses on the people. You can see the attendance patterns of individuals so that you're empowered to sort of follow up with them. And then you can sort that by individual group, right? Because it starts with them all grouped together, but you could look at just one individual group.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of filtering. So you can filter particular locations or demographics. So you can look at a big picture, or you could just sit with the leadership team of a particular congregation and kind of work with them through this.
That's so good. Yeah, I wish every church we worked with had this level of information that we could see. It would be really informative and really helpful.
Yeah. And it's early days too. So for those people who want to adopt early with what we're giving for free, it'll help sharpen us and what we can deliver as well. So there's a support group or kind of a users group on Facebook. It's been great to see some conversations in that, because this is an evolving tool. This is, only a month ago we released this. So yeah, keen to serve.
AJ, I've had a chance to see this before, but I'm curious, this is your first time, I think, getting to look at this. What questions do you have, or what jumps out to you? Because you might be kind of in the same vein or thought process as someone who is watching this right now.
Yeah, well, my first impression is it's beautiful. It really is aesthetically pleasing, Mike. So great job, both this dashboard and in the other screens where you drill into these with more detail. I love the colors and the layout and the relative simplicity of it, even though you have a wealth of information. Explain this with a little bit more detail, the strategic versus pastoral buttons at the bottom, and the thought process, and then also the varying data between the two.
Sure. So if we looked at the difference between visitor, or maybe we check on actually regularity, be a better one to explore. So the strategic one will bring up this particular dashboard here, which has your, think that's your big picture. You want to see kind of like what your overall attendance trends and patterns are like, how many people are categorized in sort of, regularity bands to give you that kind of big picture, that this is going to be the place for you to drive strategic conversation. Pastoral, you might use that, for instance, just to back up into strategic, you might use that in your monthly or quarterly strategy meetings. It's not something you're going to look at every day.
Side note, I'm shocked that the night church at this particular church is the most popular service. Yeah. Is there something cultural going on there?
Well, that's a great question for this church to explore, that's what we're on about. Yeah.
This is actual data from a user.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I
might add that we don't have access. This is a demo. We don't have access to any individual's account. We're only a connector.
Yeah.
So I just want to add some security conversation there.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of that observation, and so quickly you've observed that, drives those kind of questions. And so great, go explore. So come back to that. That would be your, you don't want to have that information every week in front of you, because there's not a lot you can do with that information every week. But that's the kind of thing, your deep, kind of. You want to richly explore that stuff when you're having big strategic conversations. Now, if we went back to the dashboard at the front here, the pastoral is more about, this is a weekly dashboard perhaps for your pastoral team. And of all the people in your church, who's that one that you need to go follow? And so that's the conversation we want to provoke. It's a different conversation, a different audience, different focus. And so we wanted to separate those two out. And again, it takes a little while to spool up here. One of the things that helps speed up this is you can have the dashboard actually email you, every week, every month, the whole PDF. And so it's just there ready to go. So you could have your pastoral team receive this an hour before that meeting, and it's just bam, away you go. You don't have to deal with it in real time if you don't want to be exploring.
That's good.
So we can see.
How long does it take to for a new client to get set up, Mike, while we're waiting for this to load?
Like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the thing is, like, the thing that I'm burdened for is, 90% of churches have a wealth of information just sitting there. And, with 10 minutes, you can start having a conversation, a really high level, educated conversation about the health of your church that you didn't know you could have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No,
So straight away, I mean, the reason I love these spark lines is they're so much richer than just a percentage of attendance. So I've seen plenty of reports that has, like, in my case, they attended 23% of services. You're like, okay, well, what's that mean? I do attend church a bit more than that in the past, I might add. But yeah, as you go down here, you can start to see blocks of patterns. So for instance, this person here attended once a while ago. Maybe we missed them, maybe that was the one that we should have caught up with, 5 weeks ago. Other people have, they haven't attended the last 2 weeks, but I'm too concerned about that because it's Christmas and they're regularly attending usually. And so that these graphical representations of patterns provokes richer conversation than just percentages.
Yeah. Well, and it would be good when it wasn't a holiday. If you saw someone who has a green line and then, 4 straight weeks of nothing, that might be a red flag to go, I wonder if something's going on in their life. Like, they're usually here all the time, and then 4 weeks they've not been here.
Yeah. So what reporting options, if that was the case, if we're like, wow, this person hasn't attended for 4 weeks in a row, how many people have been like that? Can you pull those kinds of reports, Mike?
How many would be like that?
Or like a sort option. Can you say how many people have?
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So you can click on these headings and away it'll go and sort by that percentage, for instance.
Gotcha.
I don't think it's quite so easy to say, show only those people who haven't attended the last 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're at that level, you can probably just generate an Elvanto report to do that for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we're wrestling with is, how many assumptions do we make as general usage of this system? How detailed a reporting do we give that particular churches want to receive? In the end, I think we want people to be active users of their databases, and this is kind of the first main step.
I don't think that I asked you this before, but what happens if you click on an individual person, assuming that stays anonymous?
Yeah, as I said, so it won't stay anonymous, so I'm not going to click on it. But person, that you can see that it's hyperlinked. It will take you to your Elvanto or Tithely church management system page for that person and bring up the full kind of profile of that person. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. So when you click on that, it takes you back into the database.
That's right. So you're leaving Growing Healthy Churches sort of a dashboard at that point and going into the database. So we don't want to take people away from the database. We want to be that connecting piece between the database and kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. Wow, this is really helpful information, and I hope that those of you who are watching the video version and are seeing this are going, wow, I wish I had this. So a couple calls to action. One, if you have Tithely and you're using it as, not just you're using it for giving, but you're using it as your church management software, you need to go to growinghealthierchurches.com right now and sign up while this is still free, and get disconnected for you. 2, if you don't have Tithely or Elvanto for your church management software, you need to be pestering Mike to get more databases, more software, I guess, set up with this. Something you told me, Mike, when we talked the first time, is that you said there's, how many hours did you say development hours it would take?
This is a passion project, and it's hard to learn, sort of gauge how many hours from kind of the inception of the idea to execution to this point. It could be 1,000. I don't know. Like, it's a huge amount. How many hours to build an individual connector for each database? We're talking probably hundreds. There's a lot of stuff to get across to build that connector. And so, we're offering this for free for now because we have volunteered ourselves to this project. I think to kind of keep growing, we need to work out how to resource that. So
I just want to say, I'm just putting this out there. Not that we've got, just millions of people listening, but I do want to say this, that if you are watching this and you're going, man, I'm bummed that I don't have Tithely and I wish that I had this, or that I wish that my church had this resource, and you're a person of means, Mike and his team, they've been doing this for free because they love it. And if you wanted to write a check to them and say, hey, here's some money to get the thing developed for other church management software systems. I don't know what the right way to say that would be. I'm sure they would gladly accept the help, and that would speed along the process. Saying that, like, if you believe in this kind of work,
that's very kind of you. I appreciate that.
Appreciate the help. Yeah. Mike, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time, a long time, to talk to us and show us the tool, and to talk to us about the power and pitfalls of metrics. I just love what you're doing and appreciate your time being on with us today.
Thanks for the encouragement, and I love your work. Good on you.